The rain hammered against the chapel windows like accusations from heaven itself, each drop echoing the betrayal that would soon shatter my world completely. At 67 years old, I thought I had seen every cruel twist life could offer, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the moment my dead husband's phone would buzz with a message that would turn my entire existence upside down. My name is Virginia Porter, and I live in the quiet neighborhoods of Boise, Idaho, where autumn leaves dance through streets that have witnessed 43 years of what I believed was a happy marriage. Robert and I built our life together from scratch. He worked as an electrical engineer while I taught elementary school for 35 years. We saved every penny, sacrificed countless luxuries, and invested wisely. Our modest two-story house became our sanctuary. Our retirement fund of $340,000 represented decades of careful planning, and our family seemed like the perfect culmination of a life well lived. Today was supposed to be Robert's final goodbye. The man who held my hand through 3 miscarriages, who celebrated with me when Nicholas was finally born, and who welcomed Erica into our family with open arms when she married our son 8 years ago. The mahogany casket gleamed under the chapel's soft lighting, surrounded by white lilies, his favorite flowers. Our family had gathered from across the country for this moment. My sister Margaret from Portland, Robert's brother James from Denver, and of course, Nicholas and Erica, who had been so supportive during Robert's final battle with what the doctors called a sudden heart attack. The service had been beautiful. Pastor Williams spoke eloquently about Robert's generous spirit, his dedication to community service, and his love for family. I dabbed my eyes with the lace handkerchief Robert had given me on our 20th wedding anniversary, trying to maintain the composure I'd practiced for days. Nicholas sat to my right, his strong hand occasionally squeezing mine in comfort, while Erica sat beside him, her perfectly styled auburn hair catching the light as she nodded solemnly at the pastor's words. But then it happened. During Pastor Williams' closing prayer, as heads bowed and voices murmured, "Amen," my phone vibrated against my black purse. I almost ignored it. Who would be so inconsiderate as to text during a funeral? But something compelled me to glance down. The screen lit up, and my heart stopped completely. The message was from Robert's number. "I'm still alive. Don't trust anyone. Act normal and run now." The chapel spun around me. The sweet scent of lilies became suffocating. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. This had to be a mistake. Some cruel technical glitch. Maybe someone had gotten hold of his phone somehow. But as I stared at those words, reading them again and again, a cold realization crept through my veins like poison. I forced myself to look up slowly, scanning the faces around me with new eyes. Nicholas was whispering something to Erica, and when she responded, they both glanced in my direction with expressions that made my blood freeze. Their smiles weren't grief-stricken or supportive. They were satisfied, almost triumphant. Erica's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her black dress in a rhythm that seemed almost celebratory. How had I never noticed the way Nicholas's eyes had grown cold over the past few months? How had I missed the calculating looks Erica gave me when she thought I wasn't paying attention? The way they'd both been so insistent on handling Robert's medical care, so eager to make decisions about his treatment, so quick to suggest I shouldn't burden myself with the details. The pastor's final "Amen" rang out like a death knell, but not for Robert, for the life I thought I knew. I slipped the phone back into my purse with shaking hands, my mind racing. If Robert was alive, if this message was real, then everything I'd witnessed over the past week was an elaborate lie. The heart attack, the hospital visits I wasn't allowed to attend, the closed casket decision they'd made to preserve his dignity. It was all a performance. "I need to use the restroom," I whispered to Nicholas, my voice surprisingly steady. He nodded sympathetically. "Of course, Mom. Take your time. We'll wait for you." But I wasn't coming back. As I stood and walked toward the chapel's rear exit, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Behind me, I could hear the soft murmur of condolences beginning as guests approached the family. Ahead of me lay answers I wasn't sure I was brave enough to face. If you're watching this story unfold, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I need to know I'm not alone in this darkness. My heart pounded like a war drum as I walked through the chapel's dimly lit corridor. each step echoing with the weight of 43 years of trust crumbling beneath my feet. The restroom sign glowed ahead, but I had no intention of stopping there. My destination was the side exit I'd noticed during the funeral planning, the one that led directly to the parking lot where Robert's old Buick waited like a lifeline in a sea of deception. The phone felt like it was burning through my purse. Every few seconds, I fought the urge to pull it out and read that impossible message again. I'm still alive. The words hammered against my consciousness with each heartbeat. How could Robert be alive when I'd watched them wheel his body into the funeral home? How could he be sending messages when I'd signed cremation papers just yesterday? Unless I hadn't signed them at all. The side door's cold metal handle shocked my palm as I pushed through into the October afternoon. The rain had softened to a light drizzle, but the air carried an electric tension that made every nerve in my body scream with alertness. I fumbled through my purse for the car keys, my fingers refusing to cooperate as terror and adrenaline fought for control of my nervous system. Behind me, the chapel's warmth felt like a trap I'd barely escaped. Through the stained glass windows, I could see shadows moving, the reception line forming, hands shaking, condolences flowing like rehearsed lines in a play I'd never auditioned for. Nicholas and Erica would notice my absence soon. How long did I have before they came looking? The Buick's engine turned over on the third try, a familiar rumble that had carried Robert and me through decades of adventures. But now, it was carrying me away from everything I thought I knew toward a truth that terrified me more than death itself. As I backed out of the parking space, my eyes caught movement in the chapel's main entrance. Nicholas had emerged, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. Even from this distance, I could see him scanning the parking lot, his head turning with the methodical precision of a predator searching for prey. When his gaze found the Buick, our eyes met across 50 yards of asphalt, and the mask of grief fell from his face completely. The expression that replaced it was pure, cold fury. I slammed the car into drive and pressed the accelerator harder than I had in years. The Buick lurched forward, tires squealing against the wet pavement as I raced toward the parking lot exit. In my rearview mirror, I watched Nicholas pull out his phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Calling Erica? Calling someone else? How many people were part of this conspiracy? The traffic light at Maple Street turned yellow just as I approached. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to follow the rules I'd obeyed for 67 years of careful, law-abiding life. But the phone in my purse buzzed again, and I gunned the engine through the intersection as the light turned red. The second message was longer. Virginia, if you're reading this, you escaped the funeral. Good. They think I'm dead, and they need to keep thinking that. I've been hiding in the old cabin at Bear Lake for 3 days. I saw them planning everything. The life insurance money, $500,000. They've already tried to claim it. They forged my signature on papers. Come alone. Trust no one else. Our secret place by the dock where we scattered Max's ashes. Midnight tonight. Delete these messages. I love you. R. Max. Our golden retriever who died 5 years ago. Only Robert and I knew we'd scattered his ashes by the old wooden dock where we'd shared our first kiss as teenagers. This wasn't some elaborate scam or technical glitch. This was really my husband, alive and in hiding, reaching out from what should have been his grave, the cabin at Bear Lake. We'd bought it 22 years ago as a weekend retreat, a small investment that Robert had always called our emergency nest egg. It was 40 miles north of Boise, accessible by a winding mountain road that few people knew about. If Robert was hiding there, if he'd been watching our son and daughter-in-law plot against us, then the heart attack had been staged. The closed casket had hidden an empty box or someone else's body. But how? And why? My mind raced through the past 6 months, searching for clues I'd missed. Robert's increased secrecy about our finances, the way Nicholas and Erica had suddenly become so interested in our retirement plans, the life insurance policy Robert had upgraded last year, $500,000, enough to make murder worthwhile for 2 people drowning in debt from Erica's failed boutique, and Nicholas's gambling problem I'd pretended not to notice. The road stretched ahead through tall pines and rolling hills, each mile taking me further from the civilized world where betrayal wore a funeral suit and smiled sympathetically while planning your destruction. I had 8 hours until midnight, 8 hours to process the impossible and prepare for a confrontation that would either reunite me with my husband or deliver me into a trap I might not survive. As the Buick climbed into the mountains, my phone buzzed with incoming calls. Nicholas. Erica. Nicholas again. I let them ring, their electronic pleas echoing in the silence like the desperate cries of hunters who just watched their prey slip through their fingers. The rain intensified as I drove deeper into the wilderness, but for the first time since reading that first impossible message, I smiled. If my family thought they could bury me along with their lies, they were about to learn that 67 years of surviving life's challenges had taught me more about fighting than they could possibly imagine. The mountain road to Bear Lake twisted through memories as dense as the pine forest surrounding me. Every curve brought flashbacks of happier times. Robert teaching Nicholas to fish from the cabin's small dock, family barbecues where Erica had seemed genuinely warm, holiday gatherings where laughter echoed across the water instead of lies poisoning the air. How long had this deception been brewing? How many smiles had hidden daggers? My phone continued its relentless ringing from the passenger seat. Nicholas called 17 times in the first hour. Erica added another 12. Then the calls stopped completely, replaced by a silence that felt more ominous than their persistence. They'd given up trying to coax me back, which meant they'd moved to Plan B, whatever that might be. The cabin sat on 12 acres Robert had purchased for $85,000 back in 2002, back when Nicholas was still in college and Erica was just the sweet pre-med student he'd brought home for Thanksgiving. I remembered how she'd helped me prepare that meal, her genuine laughter filling our kitchen as she told stories about growing up in small-town Oregon. When had that warmth become calculation? When had her affection transformed into a performance worthy of an Emmy? As the Buick climbed higher into the mountains, my mind dissected every interaction from the past year with surgical precision. Robert's chest pains had begun 6 months ago, always when Nicholas and Erica were visiting, always requiring rushed trips to the hospital where they'd insisted on speaking to doctors privately. I'd attributed their protectiveness to love, their insistence on handling medical details to filial duty. How naive I'd been. The life insurance policy upgrade made perfect sense now. Robert had mentioned it casually one evening in March, explaining that our financial advisor had recommended increasing coverage while his health was still good. I'd signed the papers without reading them carefully, trusting my husband's judgment as I had for over 4 decades. That same financial advisor who'd coincidentally been recommended by Nicholas, who'd coincidentally suggested the specific policy amount of $500,000, who'd coincidentally handled all the paperwork with minimal involvement from Robert or me. 50 miles from Boise, the cellular signal weakened to a single bar. Good. If Nicholas and Erica were tracking my phone, this would make it significantly harder. The late afternoon sun slanted through thick clouds, casting the forest in shades of amber and shadow that matched my emotional state, caught between light and darkness, hope and terror. I pulled over at a scenic overlook to collect my thoughts and delete Robert's messages as instructed. My fingers trembled as I read his words one more time before watching them disappear into digital oblivion. They think I'm dead, and they need to keep thinking that. The implications were staggering. If Robert was alive, if he was hiding at our cabin, then the body in that mahogany casket belonged to someone else, someone whose death had been necessary to make this elaborate fraud possible. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just tried to steal our money, they'd committed murder. Bear Lake appeared through the trees like a mirror reflecting the turbulent sky. The water stretched for 2 miles in each direction, surrounded by wilderness so complete that our nearest neighbor lived 8 miles away. Perfect isolation for a family reunion that would either restore my faith in reality or end my life in the same remote beauty where Robert and I had shared our happiest moments. Our cabin sat on the eastern shore, a modest 2-bedroom structure Robert had built largely with his own hands. Solar panels powered essential systems, a generator provided backup electricity, and a well-supplied fresh water. We designed it as a self-sufficient retreat where we could disconnect from the world's chaos and reconnect with each other. Now it might become the setting for the most important conversation of my life, assuming Robert was really there, assuming this wasn't an elaborate trap designed to finish what the fake funeral had started. I parked the Buick behind a stand of pine trees, hiding it from casual view. The silence that followed the engine's death was absolute, except for wind through branches and water lapping against the distant shore. No other cars, no signs of recent human activity, no indication that anyone had been here recently. But Robert would have been careful to hide his presence. The spare key hung exactly where we'd left it, inside a fake rock beside the porch steps. The cabin's interior smelled of pine polish and old memories, every piece of furniture exactly as we'd left it during our last visit in August. Robert's fishing gear stood in the corner, my collection of lake-themed novels filled the bookshelf, our wedding photo smiled down from the mantelpiece as if mocking the destruction of everything it represented. But small details suggested recent occupancy. A coffee mug in the sink that hadn't been there in August, fresh firewood stacked beside the stone fireplace. Most telling of all, the bed in the master bedroom showed signs of use, sheets rumpled, pillows indented, a prescription bottle on the nightstand that definitely hadn't been there during our summer visits. I picked up the bottle with shaking hands. Nitroglycerin tablets prescribed to Robert Porter, filled 3 days ago at a pharmacy in McCall, 30 miles north of here. The same medication he'd been taking for his supposed heart condition. The same pills that had been beside his hospital bed during those visits I wasn't allowed to witness. The evidence was overwhelming. My husband was alive, hiding in our cabin, preparing for a midnight revelation that would change everything. But questions multiplied faster than answers. If Robert had discovered Nicholas and Erica's plot, why hadn't he simply confronted them? Why stage his own death instead of going to the police? And most disturbing of all, whose body had filled his casket? As sunset painted the lake in shades of gold and crimson, I settled into the rocking chair on the porch to wait for answers. 6 hours until midnight felt like a lifetime, but I'd waited 43 years for this marriage to reveal its deepest secrets. I could wait 6 more hours to discover whether those secrets would save us or destroy everything we'd built together. The last light faded from the sky, and darkness claimed the mountains. Somewhere in that darkness, truth was waiting. Darkness fell over Bear Lake like a curtain, hiding the final act of a play I'd never wanted to star in. The cabin's porch became my watchtower as I rocked slowly in the chair where Robert and I had shared countless peaceful evenings, never imagining that one day I'd be sitting here alone, waiting for my supposedly dead husband to emerge from whatever shadows had been sheltering him. The October night carried a bite that went deeper than temperature. Every sound, wind through pine needles, water against the dock, the distant call of a night bird, made me jump with anticipation or terror. I'd armed myself with Robert's old hunting rifle from the gun cabinet, though I prayed I'd never need to use it. At 67, my hands weren't as steady as they'd once been, and my heart couldn't take much more shock than it had already endured. Around 9 o'clock, headlights swept across the lake from the main road, then disappeared. False alarm, probably just someone heading to one of the other cabins scattered around the lake's perimeter. But the brief illumination reminded me that Nicholas and Erica had also visited this place multiple times. They knew the location, knew the spare key's hiding spot, knew every inch of the property where Robert and I had believed we were safe. My mind wandered to the financial implications of what I'd discovered. The $500,000 life insurance policy was just the beginning. Robert and I had built substantial assets over our decades together. The Boise house worth $420,000, our retirement accounts totaling $340,000, savings bonds and CDs worth another $180,000. Combined with the life insurance, they were looking at nearly $1.5 million in total inheritance, enough money to justify murder in the minds of people desperate enough to consider it. Erica's boutique had failed spectacularly last year, hemorrhaging $75,000 in startup costs and leaving them with crushing debt. Nicholas's gambling addiction, which I'd discovered purely by accident when I'd seen him at the Indian casino during what was supposed to be a business trip, had undoubtedly made their financial situation even more desperate. When people face losing everything, they sometimes convince themselves that extreme measures become justified. But murder? The word still felt impossible in connection with the young man who'd made me Mother's Day cards from construction paper and glitter, the boy who'd cried in my arms when his first girlfriend broke his heart, the son I'd sacrificed so much to raise properly after 3 miscarriages had taught me never to take motherhood for granted. 10:30 brought another set of headlights, these moving more slowly along the lake road. I gripped the rifle tighter and crept to the cabin's front window, peering through a gap in the curtains. The lights stopped at the Anderson cabin 2 properties down, and I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But the near panic reminded me that I was completely isolated here. If this was a trap, if Nicholas and Erica had somehow orchestrated even these messages to lure me away from civilization, my body might not be discovered until spring. The rational part of my mind, the part that had survived 67 years by being practical and careful, screamed warnings with every heartbeat. This situation was insane. Dead men don't send text messages. Loving sons don't murder their parents. Devoted daughters-in-law don't participate in elaborate insurance fraud schemes. Everything I'd convinced myself to believe over the past 8 hours violated common sense and basic reality. But the prescription bottle on the nightstand was real. The rumpled sheets were real. The coffee mug was real. Someone had been living in this cabin, and someone who knew intimate details about Robert and me had sent those messages. The reference to Max's ashes, the specific location by the dock, only my husband possessed that knowledge. 11:15 found me pacing the cabin's living room like a caged animal. The familiar space felt alien now, every shadow potentially hiding threats or revelations. Our family photos lined the mantelpiece. Nicholas's high school graduation, Erica's wedding day when she'd looked so radiant in white lace, Christmas mornings filled with laughter and love. When had those smiles become masks? When had affection become performance art designed to hide homicidal intentions? I paused before the photo from Nicholas's 30th birthday party 5 years ago. Robert stood behind our son with his hands on Nicholas's shoulders, pride radiating from every line of his face. Erica laughed at something out of frame, her arm linked through mine in sisterly affection. We all looked so genuinely happy, so completely devoted to each other. Had it all been an illusion? Had I been blind to warning signs that should have been obvious? The clock's hands crept toward midnight with agonizing slowness. 11:45, 11:50. At 11:55, I pulled on my coat and walked toward the dock where we'd scattered Max's ashes on a sunny spring morning that felt like a lifetime ago. The wooden boards creaked under my feet, each sound echoing across the still water like footsteps of ghosts from happier times. Midnight arrived with absolute silence. No Robert emerging from the shadows. No whispered reunions. No dramatic revelations. Just me standing alone on a dock in the middle of nowhere, holding a rifle I didn't want to use while waiting for a dead man who might never come. At 12:15, doubt began creeping in with the cold. Had I misunderstood the messages? Was I supposed to wait inside the cabin? Had I been so desperate to believe Robert was alive that I'd convinced myself to see meaning in random electronic glitches? Then I heard it, the soft splash of oars cutting through water. A small rowboat emerged from the darkness beyond the dock's reach, moving slowly and silently toward shore. The figure hunched over the oars was difficult to make out in the moonlight, but the familiar rhythm of movement, the careful way he handled the boat, the protective posture that had sheltered me through 4 decades, every detail screamed the impossible truth. Robert Porter, my supposedly dead husband, was rowing toward our reunion across water that reflected the moon like scattered diamonds. As the boat drew closer, our eyes met across the space between life and death, between truth and deception, between the family I thought I knew and the reality I was about to discover. The rowboat bumped gently against the dock's edge with a sound that echoed across the water like a whisper from the grave. Robert's hands, the same hands that had held mine on our wedding day 43 years ago, gripped the dock's weathered boards as he pulled himself up with movements that belonged to a man very much alive. Virginia. His voice carried the weight of 3 days' terror and a lifetime of love. Thank God you came. I dropped the rifle and threw my arms around him before rational thought could interfere. His body felt solid and warm, real in a way that no ghost or hallucination could manage. The familiar scent of his aftershave mixed with fear sweat and pine needles created an olfactory proof of his existence that shattered the last of my disbelief. I watched them bury you, I whispered against his shoulder, my tears soaking through his flannel shirt. I held your wedding ring. I signed papers. How is this possible? Robert's arms tightened around me with desperate strength. Because it wasn't me in that casket, Virginia. It was Harold Wickham. The name hit me like a physical blow. Harold Wickham, the homeless veteran who'd been coming to our community center for meals over the past year. A man roughly Robert's age and build, someone whose disappearance wouldn't be immediately investigated, someone whose death could be attributed to natural causes, and whose body could be claimed by family before questions arose. Harold had a massive stroke 3 days ago at the shelter, Robert continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas found him, realized the opportunity, and called Erica. They moved his body to the funeral home, where Erica's cousin Marcus works as a mortician. Remember how insistent they were about a closed casket, about handling all the arrangements themselves? The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus Wellborn, Erica's cousin who'd moved to Boise 6 months ago and started working at Restwood Memorial, the same funeral home that had processed Robert's body with unusual speed and efficiency, the same place where Nicholas and Erica had made all the arrangements while keeping me away from the details to spare me additional grief. But the heart attack, I protested, the hospital visits, the doctors who treated you. Robert's laugh was bitter as winter wind. There were no doctors, Virginia. They drove me to different hospitals, but I never got past the parking lots. The whole thing was performance art designed to establish a medical history that would make my sudden death seem believable. The magnitude of the deception staggered me. For 6 months, they'd been planning this elaborate fraud, creating false medical records, establishing relationships with Marcus at the funeral home, probably researching Harold Wickham's habits to ensure his disappearance wouldn't interfere with their timeline. I figured it out completely by accident, Robert continued, guiding me toward the cabin where we could talk privately. Last Tuesday, I saw Erica and Marcus together at the Riverside Cafe, way too intimate for cousins, talking about the timeline and making sure everything was ready. When I followed them, I heard enough to understand what they were planning. We sat on the porch steps, where we'd shared morning coffee during countless peaceful visits. But peace felt like a foreign concept now, replaced by the knowledge that our son and daughter-in-law had planned our murders with the methodical precision of professional criminals. They're not just after the life insurance, Robert said, his voice heavy with betrayal. They've been systematically preparing to claim everything. Forged power of attorney documents, fake wills, even preliminary paperwork to sell the house. Erica's been working as a paralegal for 6 months. She learned exactly how to manipulate the legal system. The $1.5 million total of our combined assets suddenly seemed like a fortune worth killing for, especially to people drowning in debt and desperation. But the planning required, the cold calculation, the willingness to murder family members, it painted a picture of Nicholas and Erica that I couldn't reconcile with the people who'd shared our holiday tables and birthday celebrations. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked. Why stage your own death instead of simply exposing them? Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring across the moonlit lake. Because I needed proof that would stand up in court. My word against theirs wouldn't be enough. They'd covered their tracks too well, and Erica's legal knowledge made their documentation nearly perfect. But if they actually went through with claiming the insurance money, if they tried to execute their plan, then we'd have evidence of active fraud and conspiracy. The logic was sound but terrifying. Robert had been using himself as bait, allowing Nicholas and Erica to believe they'd succeeded in order to catch them in the act of claiming benefits from his fraudulent death. It was a strategy that required incredible courage and equally incredible faith that nothing would go wrong. But Harold Wickham is really dead, I pointed out. That makes this more than fraud. It makes it desecration of a corpse at minimum, possibly murder if they hastened his death somehow. I know, Robert said grimly. That's why we can't wait much longer to involve the authorities. Every day we delay gives them more opportunity to complete their crime and potentially destroy evidence. A sound from the lake made us both freeze, the distant rumble of a motorboat cutting through the night silence. Robert immediately pulled me into the cabin and extinguished the porch light, plunging us into darkness broken only by moonlight filtering through curtains. "They've found us," he whispered. Through the window I could see headlights reflecting off the water as a boat approached our section of shoreline. The engine cut off about a quarter-mile away, but the silence that followed felt more threatening than any noise could have been. Nicholas and Erica had come to finish what the fake funeral had started. The reunion I'd prayed for had become the trap I'd feared, And somewhere in the darkness surrounding our cabin, our son and daughter-in-law were preparing to turn their elaborate fraud into a double murder that would eliminate the only witnesses to their crimes. The darkness outside our cabin felt alive with malevolent intent. Robert moved through the familiar space with the stealth of a man who'd spent 3 days hiding from killers, gathering supplies and weapons, while I positioned myself by the window to watch for approaching threats. The moonlight that had seemed romantic during our reunion now illuminated potential death sentences moving across the water. "How many are coming?" I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. Robert paused in his preparations, holding a box of ammunition he'd retrieved from the gun cabinet. "At least Nicholas and Erica, but probably Marcus too. They can't afford to leave witnesses, and they'll need help disposing of our bodies where they'll never be found." The casual way he discussed our potential murders sent ice through my veins. This was really happening. Our son, the baby I'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, the toddler who'd brought me dandelions and called them flowers, the young man who'd walked me down the aisle when my father died before my second wedding to Robert, was approaching through the darkness with the intention of ending our lives for money. A splash from the direction of the dock confirmed our worst fears. They'd landed and were probably already moving through the trees toward the cabin. The thick forest that had always felt like protective privacy now provided perfect cover for an approach we wouldn't see coming until it was too late. "The back door," Robert murmured, shouldering a backpack he'd hastily filled with essentials. "We go into the forest, circle around to where they left their boat, and take it to reach help." It was a solid plan with one major flaw. I was 67 years old, hadn't hiked through wilderness in years, and my knees protested even gentle morning walks around our Boise neighborhood. But staying in the cabin meant certain death, so I followed Robert toward the rear exit with determination born of pure survival instinct. The back door's hinges creaked with a sound that seemed to echo across the entire lake. We both froze, listening for any indication that we'd been heard. Nothing. Only wind through pine needles and the distant sound of careful footsteps moving around the cabin's perimeter. The forest behind our property was a maze of trees, fallen logs, and undergrowth that would challenge experienced hikers in daylight. At night, with only scattered moonlight filtering through the canopy, it felt like navigating through a nightmare. Robert led the way, moving with confidence born of decades exploring these woods, while I struggled to keep up without making noise that would reveal our location. 20 yards from the cabin, we heard the front door explode inward. "Mom! Dad! We know you're here!" Nicholas's voice carried clearly through the still air, but the tone was nothing like the concerned son who'd comforted me at the funeral. This voice belonged to a predator who'd cornered his prey and was savoring the moment before the kill. "Virginia, come out now, and we'll make this quick," Erica added, her words dripping with false sympathy. "We found Robert's phone. We know he's been texting you, but he's really dead, sweetie. You're having a breakdown, and we're here to help." The psychological manipulation was almost as terrifying as the physical threat. If they managed to frame this as an elderly woman's mental breakdown following her husband's death, if they could make it appear that I'd killed Robert in some delusional episode and then committed suicide from grief, they'd not only inherit everything, but also generate sympathy as the grieving family members trying to cope with a terrible tragedy. Glass shattered as they searched the cabin with increasing violence. Furniture crashed to the floor. Cabinet doors banged open and slammed shut. They were looking for evidence of our presence, clues to where we might have gone, anything that could help them track us through the darkness. "Check the boat shed," Marcus's voice joined the others. I recognized him now. Erica's cousin, who'd seemed so professional and compassionate during the funeral arrangements, so helpful in handling details that would be too difficult for the widow to manage. His presence confirmed that this was a 3-person conspiracy with backup plans and contingencies we hadn't anticipated. Robert grabbed my hand and pulled me deeper into the forest as flashlight beams began sweeping the area around the cabin. They'd found our trail quickly, too quickly for random searching. Marcus probably had experience with outdoor tracking, or maybe Nicholas remembered childhood camping trips where Robert had taught him wilderness skills that were now being used against us. We moved as quickly as we dared through increasingly dense undergrowth. Thorns caught at my clothes and scratched my face. Roots threatened to trip me with every step. My lungs burned with the effort of maintaining a pace that felt sustainable for maybe another 10 minutes before exhaustion would force us to either rest or be caught. Behind us, the voices were getting closer. They went toward the lake, Erica called out, probably trying to reach the Andersons' place. Thank God they'd guessed wrong. The Andersons' cabin was in the opposite direction from where we were heading, but their mistake bought us only a temporary reprieve. Once they realized their error, they'd expand the search pattern and eventually cover the entire area. The boat they'd used to reach our shore sat approximately half a mile around the lake's perimeter, assuming they'd followed the most logical approach route. In daylight, with clear trails, it would be a pleasant 20-minute walk. In darkness, through unmarked forest, while being hunted by armed killers, it felt like an impossible journey. But impossible was our only option. As we stumbled through the wilderness that had once been our peaceful retreat, I couldn't help thinking about the bitter irony of our situation. The same isolation that had made Bear Lake perfect for romantic getaways now made it perfect for murder. The same remoteness that had allowed us to escape life's stresses now trapped us with killers who had all night to hunt us down. A distant shout indicated they'd discovered our rear exit. The chase was officially beginning, and we were running out of time to reach safety before they realized their mistake about our direction. Robert squeezed my hand reassuringly, but I could feel the tremor in his grip that betrayed his own terror. We were two elderly people fleeing through hostile terrain while being pursued by younger, stronger enemies who knew these woods almost as well as we did. Our odds of survival were diminishing with every step into the darkness. The forest became our battlefield as we fought through undergrowth that seemed designed to slow our escape. Every step carried us deeper into wilderness that had transformed from peaceful sanctuary to potential graveyard. Behind us, flashlight beams swept through the trees like searchlights hunting escaped prisoners, growing steadily closer despite our best efforts to maintain distance. My legs screamed with exhaustion after 30 minutes of stumbling over fallen logs and through clusters of thorns that tore at my funeral dress. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was fleeing for my life while dressed for my husband's burial, the black fabric that had seemed so appropriate for mourning now serving as camouflage in our desperate flight. Robert paused behind a massive pine tree, both of us breathing heavily as we listened for sounds of pursuit. The voices had grown more distant, suggesting our pursuers had indeed followed the wrong trail initially, but we could still hear them calling to each other as they coordinated their search pattern. "Dad! Mom! This is ridiculous!" Nicholas's voice echoed through the forest, tinged with frustration and something darker. "You can't hide out here forever. Let's talk about this like adults." The manipulation in his tone was nauseating. Even now, as he hunted us through the wilderness with murderous intent, he was trying to sound like the reasonable son dealing with confused elderly parents. If anyone found our bodies tomorrow, they'd probably believe we'd gotten lost during a grief-induced mental breakdown and died of exposure. "We're about halfway," Robert whispered, checking the compass he'd grabbed from our emergency supplies. "But they're going to figure out our direction soon." As if summoned by his words, a new voice joined the search, female, unfamiliar, with the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders. "Fan out in a half-circle formation," the woman commanded. "They're heading toward the north shore. Marcus, take the eastern perimeter. Nicholas, sweep west. I'll maintain center position." My blood froze as I realized they'd brought a fourth conspirator, someone with what sounded like military or law enforcement experience. The careful coordination, the tactical language, the efficient organization. We weren't just being pursued by desperate amateurs anymore. "Who is that?" I breathed against Robert's ear. His expression was grim as he shouldered the backpack and prepared to continue our flight. "I don't know, but she sounds like someone who's done this before." The implication was terrifying. If Nicholas and Erica had recruited professional help, if they'd connected with someone experienced in hunting people through wilderness terrain, our chances of escape had just dropped to nearly zero. We resumed our desperate journey, moving as quickly as stealth would allow, while the tactical coordination behind us grew more sophisticated. They were herding us now, using multiple positions to funnel our movement toward a specific area where capture would be inevitable. The lake appeared through the trees ahead like a silver mirror reflecting our dwindling hopes. We'd covered most of the distance to where their boat should be waiting, but the final approach would require crossing open ground where concealment would be impossible. If they'd positioned someone to guard their escape route, we'd be walking directly into a trap. Robert held up his hand for silence as we crouched behind a fallen log at the forest's edge. The shoreline stretched for 50 yards of moonlit exposure before reaching the small cove where enemy voices had first approached. No movement was visible, but that didn't mean no one was watching. "We go together," he whispered, fast and low, straight to the water. "If someone's waiting, at least we'll see them before they can react." It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all we had left. I clutched his hand as we burst from the tree line and raced across the open ground with the lurching gait of two elderly people pushed far beyond their physical limits. 20 yards, 30. The sound of our breathing and footsteps seemed thunderous in the night silence. Any second I expected to hear the crack of gunfire or the shouts of discovery. 40 yards. The shoreline was close enough to smell the lake water and hear the gentle lapping of waves against rocks. Still no signs of an ambush. We reached the water's edge, gasping with exhaustion and relief. But the small cove was empty except for dark water and smooth stones. No boat, no escape route, no hope. "They moved it," Robert panted, scanning the shoreline desperately. "Or this isn't where they landed." The sound of approaching voices through the forest behind us eliminated any possibility of searching for another landing site. We had perhaps 3 minutes before our pursuers emerged from the tree line and found us trapped against the water like cornered animals. "The old fishing platform," I said suddenly, remembering a structure built into the lake about a quarter mile to our east. "If we can reach it, maybe hide underneath until they move on." It was a fragile hope, but it was all we had. The platform had been built by previous cabin owners as a fishing station in deeper water, accessible by swimming or wading during low water periods. If we could reach it without being seen, the space underneath might provide temporary concealment. We entered the lake fully clothed, the October water shocking our systems with cold that went beyond temperature into the realm of potential hypothermia. But dying from exposure was preferable to dying from bullets, so we waded deeper until the water reached our chests and began a desperate swim toward the platform's dark silhouette. The icy water sapped our strength with every stroke. My funeral dress became a weight, dragging me down, while Robert struggled with the waterlogged backpack he refused to abandon. Behind us, flashlight beams emerged from the forest and began sweeping the shoreline we'd just abandoned. "There!" Marcus's voice carried clearly across the water. "Tracks leading into the lake." The beams focused on the water's surface, searching for signs of our passage. We were still 20 yards from the platform, too far from safety, and too visible in the moonlight that had seemed romantic just an hour ago. "I see movement," the unknown woman shouted. "Southeast, near the old platform." Gunfire erupted across the lake's surface as bullets slapped into the water around us. We dove underwater and swam blind, holding our breath while projectiles cut through the space where our heads had been moments before. When we surfaced gasping beneath the fishing platform, we found ourselves in a space barely large enough for both of us, surrounded by cold water and pursued by killers who now knew exactly where we were hiding. Our escape had failed, and the final confrontation was about to begin. The space beneath the fishing platform felt like a coffin floating on water. We huddled together in the cramped darkness, our bodies shaking from cold and terror, while bullets continued to pepper the lake's surface above us. The wooden planks that had once supported peaceful fishing expeditions now served as our only barrier against execution. "Virginia! Robert!" Erica's voice called across the water with false sweetness. "This is silly. You're going to die from hypothermia if you stay in there much longer. Come out and let's discuss this rationally." Robert's grip on my hand tightened as we pressed ourselves against the platform's support posts. The water around us was dark as coffee, hiding us for now, but our breathing created small splashes that would eventually give away our exact position. More importantly, Erica was right about the hypothermia. October water in Idaho mountains could kill us within 30 minutes, assuming the bullets didn't find us first. "We know about Harold Wickham," Robert called back, his voice carrying clearly across the still water. "We know Marcus moved his body to make this whole fraud possible. The police are already investigating the irregularities in his death certificate." Silence followed his bluff, long enough to suggest we'd hit close to home. Then Nicholas's voice responded with venom I'd never heard from our son before. "You don't know anything, old man. Harold died naturally, and his body would have gone to a pauper's grave anyway. We just gave his death some meaning by making it financially beneficial to people who actually mattered. The casual cruelty in his words destroyed the last remnants of maternal hope I'd been clinging to. This wasn't our son speaking. This was a stranger who'd inherited Nicholas's face and voice, but possessed the moral emptiness of a predator. The boy who'd cried at Old Yeller and insisted on feeding stray cats had become someone who could rationalize grave robbery and murder as acts of financial pragmatism. Harold mattered, I called back, surprised by the strength in my own voice. He was a veteran who served his country, a human being with dignity and worth that you violated for money. Erica's laughter rippled across the water like glass breaking. Dignity doesn't pay credit card bills, Virginia. Harold's dignity wouldn't have saved our house from foreclosure or prevented bankruptcy from destroying our future. Your deaths will. The platform shuddered as someone climbed onto it from a boat I hadn't heard approaching. Heavy footsteps moved across the boards above us, accompanied by the metallic clicking of a gun being loaded. They'd brought their hunt onto the platform itself, positioning themselves directly over our hiding place. "Last chance," the unknown woman's voice commanded from above. "Surface now and die quickly, or stay hidden and die slowly from exposure. Either way, you're not leaving this lake alive." Through gaps in the platform's boards, I could see the silhouettes of at least 3 people standing directly over us. But the fourth voice, the woman with tactical knowledge, remained a mystery that terrified me more than our known enemies. Robert squeezed my hand 3 times, our old signal for "I love you" that we'd used since early marriage. In that gesture, I felt 43 years of partnership, shared dreams, and mutual devotion that money could never buy or betrayal could ever truly destroy. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, we would face it together. The sound of approaching sirens carried across the lake like salvation wrapped in electronic wails. Multiple vehicles, growing louder, accompanied by the distinctive whine of emergency boat motors cutting through water. Someone had called for help, but who? "What the hell?" Marcus's voice from the platform carried panic that hadn't been there before. "Who called the cops?" "Shut up and think," the mystery woman snapped. "We finish this now, before they get close enough to interfere." But the sirens were already close, and powerful searchlights were sweeping across the lake from multiple directions. The cavalry was arriving, though I had no idea who'd summoned them or why they'd known to come to Bear Lake. "This is the Ada County Sheriff's Department," a amplified voice boomed across the water. "Drop your weapons and place your hands on your heads. The platform is surrounded." Chaos erupted above us as our would-be killers realized their hunting expedition had become a trap. Feet pounded across the boards as they tried to escape to their boat, but engine noise from multiple directions indicated law enforcement vessels were converging from all sides. "How did they know?" Nicholas screamed, his voice cracking with the desperation of someone watching a perfect crime collapse into disaster. "We were careful. We covered everything." The answer came from an unexpected source, Robert's waterlogged backpack, which chose that moment to emit a series of electronic beeps. GPS tracking device, emergency beacon, some form of communication he'd activated before our flight into the forest. "Insurance policy," he whispered to me with a weak smile. "I contacted my old Army buddy Jim Morrison before coming to the cabin. He's been tracking us through military-grade GPS, with instructions to call law enforcement if we went dark or if the signal entered the lake. My husband, the cautious engineer who'd spent 40 years planning for every contingency, had anticipated even this worst-case scenario. While I'd been terrified that his fake death was reckless improvisation, he'd actually been executing a careful strategy designed to catch our enemies while protecting both of us. Gunfire erupted above us as our pursuers made their final desperate attempt to fight their way past law enforcement. But the battle was brief and one-sided. Professional officers with tactical training versus amateurs driven by greed rather than skill. "Suspects secured," the amplified voice announced. "Search and rescue teams. Begin sweep for the elderly couple." We emerged from our hiding place to find the platform surrounded by Sheriff's Department boats, their searchlights turning night into day. Nicholas, Erica, and Marcus sat in handcuffs aboard one vessel, while a fourth figure, a woman I didn't recognize, was being loaded onto a medical transport after apparently being wounded during the brief firefight. As rescue swimmers pulled us from the hypothermia-inducing water, I caught sight of Nicholas one final time. Our eyes met across the space between vessels, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of the little boy who'd once been my entire world. Then the moment passed, replaced by the cold stare of someone who'd chosen money over family and would now face the consequences of that choice. The trap our son and daughter-in-law had designed to steal our lives had become their own prison, and justice was finally closing its net around the predators who'd hunted us through the darkness. But the full scope of their crimes was yet to be revealed. The Ada County Sheriff's Department briefing room smelled of stale coffee and fluorescent determination as Detective Sarah Martinez laid out the evidence that would destroy what remained of my family forever. Robert and I sat wrapped in emergency blankets, still shivering from our night in the lake, while the full scope of Nicholas and Erica's conspiracy unfolded like a toxic flower blooming in artificial light. "We've been investigating Marcus Wellborn for 6 weeks," Detective Martinez explained, spreading photographs across the conference table. "Insurance fraud, body switching, falsified death certificates. He's been running this operation across 3 counties. Your son and daughter-in-law were just his latest clients." The photos showed Harold Wickham in life, a thin, weathered man whose eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much war and too little kindness. In death, he'd become a prop in someone else's greed, his dignity sacrificed so Nicholas and Erica could fund their lifestyle while we mourned a funeral that was built on lies. The 4th person was Detective Linda Crawford, Martinez continued, placing a mugshot beside the other evidence. Former Portland police, discharged for evidence tampering. She's been Wellborn's partner for 18 months, using law enforcement contacts to expedite fake paperwork and avoid investigations. Former police. That explained the tactical coordination, the professional hunting techniques, the calm authority in her voice as she directed our would-be execution. Nicholas and Erica hadn't just stumbled into this conspiracy. They'd connected with career criminals who'd made insurance fraud into an art form. "How long were they planning this?" Robert asked, his voice still hoarse from our ordeal. Detective Martinez consulted her notes. "Based on phone records and financial transactions, at least 8 months. Erica started working as a paralegal, specifically to learn legal procedures, while Nicholas established gambling debts that created a paper trail of financial desperation. They needed to show clear motive for accessing your assets legitimately. The methodical planning was almost worse than the violence. This hadn't been a crime of passion or desperate improvisation. It had been a calculated, long-term project to murder us for money while maintaining their social standing as grieving family members. Every family dinner over the past 8 months, every birthday celebration, every casual conversation had been part of an elaborate performance designed to lull us into trusting the people planning our deaths. The financial evidence is overwhelming," Martinez continued, spreading bank statements and legal documents across the table. Forged power of attorney forms, fake wills leaving everything to Nicholas, preliminary loan applications using your house as collateral. They'd already begun the process of liquidating your assets before you were actually dead. The documents showed my forged signature on papers I'd never seen, Robert's name on medical forms he'd never signed, legal declarations that would have transferred our entire life's work to people who'd seen us as nothing more than obstacles to their financial goals. We'd been reduced to numbers on spreadsheets, dollar amounts that made murder seem like sound business strategy. "What about the insurance money?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Already filed for," Martinez replied grimly. Erica submitted the claim 3 hours after the funeral, citing emotional urgency and financial hardship. The insurance company was prepared to expedite payment within 72 hours. They would have received $500,000 before anyone questioned the validity of Robert's death. $500,000 for 43 years of marriage, decades of sacrifice, a lifetime of love and partnership. To Nicholas and Erica, our relationship had been worth exactly as much as the policy Robert had purchased to protect me if he died naturally. They'd commodified our devotion and priced our lives at market rates. "But they made mistakes," Robert observed, studying the evidence with the analytical mind that had kept us alive. "Enough mistakes for you to catch them," Martinez nodded. "Marcus Wellborn got greedy and sloppy. 3 suspicious deaths in 6 months, all involving closed casket funerals and expedited insurance claims. When Harold Wickham's disappearance was reported by the Veterans Shelter, we started connecting dots. Your case was going to be the one that brought down their entire operation." The irony was bitter. Harold's death had been the clue that would eventually expose his desecration. The homeless veteran's final service to his country was helping to catch the criminals who'd violated his remains for profit. "What happens now?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Nicholas faces charges for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, body desecration, and financial elder abuse," Martinez replied. "Erica gets the same charges plus practicing law without a license and forging legal documents. Based on the evidence, they're looking at 25 to 30 years minimum, assuming they accept plea bargains. 25 to 30 years. My son, the baby I'd carried for 9 months, the toddler I'd taught to walk, the young man I'd been proud to call family, would spend the rest of his useful life in prison for trying to murder the parents who'd given him everything. The mathematics of justice were as cold as the lake water we'd nearly died in." "What about Harold?" Robert asked quietly. "What happens to his body?" "Proper burial with military honors," Martinez assured us. "The VA is handling arrangements. His service record shows 2 tours in Vietnam. He deserves better than what they did to him." At least Harold Wickham would find peace. At least his final rest would include the dignity that had been stolen from him by people who'd seen his death as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. As we prepared to leave the sheriff's department, Detective Martinez handed us a business card and a final piece of information that would haunt me forever. "For what it's worth," she said quietly. "Nicholas broke down during interrogation. He kept saying he was sorry, that the gambling debts made him desperate, that Erica convinced him you'd never know because the insurance money would support you for years. I think part of him still loves you." Love. The word felt poisonous now, corrupted by association with betrayal and attempted murder. Nicholas might have convinced himself that killing us was an act of love, a way to solve our problems while solving his own. But love doesn't forge signatures on death certificates. Love doesn't hunt parents through dark forests with loaded weapons. Love doesn't reduce family to financial statements and inheritance projections. As Robert and I walked out of the sheriff's department into the sunrise of a new day, I realized that the hardest part of our ordeal wasn't behind us. It was just beginning. We'd survived the physical threats, exposed the criminal conspiracy, and ensured that justice would be served. But how do you rebuild a life when your own son has tried to murder you for money? How do you trust again when the people closest to you have revealed themselves as strangers wearing familiar faces? The legal battles were over, but the emotional devastation would last forever. 6 months after the night that shattered our world, Robert and I stood in the cemetery where Harold Wickham had finally been laid to rest with the honor he deserved. The military funeral had been attended by dozens of veterans who'd never met him in life, but refused to let him face death alone. The American flag on his grave fluttered in the spring breeze, a symbol of service that transcended the violations inflicted on his remains. "Thank you," I whispered to the headstone, placing fresh flowers beside the small flag. "Thank you for helping us find the truth." The past months had been a labyrinth of legal proceedings, media attention, and psychological healing that felt like learning to breathe again after nearly drowning. Nicholas and Erica had both accepted plea bargains, 30 years for him, 25 for her, while Marcus Wellborn and Linda Crawford faced federal charges that would likely keep them imprisoned for life. The conspiracy that had targeted us was revealed to involve at least 12 other families across 3 states, making our case the centerpiece of a massive fraud investigation. But justice, however satisfying in principle, couldn't repair the damage done to our hearts. We'd sold the Boise house and bought a smaller place in Coeur d'Alene, 200 miles from the memories and media scrutiny that made our old life impossible. The Bear Lake cabin had been donated to the veterans organization that had cared for Harold Wickham. Somehow it felt appropriate that the place where we'd nearly died should become a sanctuary for people who'd truly served their country. The financial recovery had been straightforward compared to the emotional reconstruction. The $500,000 insurance policy they'd tried to claim remained untouched, supplementing our retirement accounts that Nicholas and Erica had attempted to loot through forged documents. We were actually more financially secure than before the conspiracy began, though security felt meaningless when it came at the cost of family. "I got another letter from Nicholas yesterday," Robert said as we walked back toward our car. The monthly letters had become routine, desperate pleas for forgiveness mixed with rambling explanations about gambling addiction, financial pressure, and Erica's manipulation. They read like the confessions of a stranger who'd stolen our son's identity and was now trying to return it. "Did you read it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Robert read every letter, hoping to find some trace of the boy we'd raised, some evidence that our son still existed beneath the man who'd tried to murder us. I'd stopped reading them after the third month, when it became clear that understanding Nicholas's motivations wouldn't heal the wounds he'd inflicted. "He's in protective custody," Robert said. "Apparently other inmates don't appreciate people who try to kill their parents for insurance money." There was poetic justice in that detail, though it brought no satisfaction. Nicholas was discovering that even among criminals, certain boundaries existed that shouldn't be crossed. Family loyalty was apparently sacred even in prison, a lesson he'd learned too late to save himself from the consequences of violating it. We drove home through the Idaho countryside that had become our new sanctuary, past lakes and forests that held no memories of betrayal. Our new house sat on 2 acres overlooking Lake Coeur d'Alene, where we'd found peace in simplicity and security in isolation. The neighbors were friendly but respectful of privacy. The local community had welcomed us without prying into our past, and for the first time in months, we could watch sunsets without scanning the shadows for threats. "Virginia." Robert's voice was thoughtful as he turned into our driveway. "I've been thinking about something Detective Martinez told us." "What's that?" "She said we were lucky to survive because most insurance murder plots succeed. The families never see it coming because they can't imagine their loved ones being capable of that level of betrayal. We survived because we questioned what didn't make sense instead of accepting what we wanted to believe." It was true. If I hadn't been alert enough to notice the strange smiles at the funeral, if Robert hadn't been suspicious enough to investigate Erica and Marcus's secret meetings, if we hadn't questioned the inconsistencies in Nicholas's behavior, we would have died believing our son loved us. Our skepticism had saved our lives, but it had also destroyed our faith in the family we'd spent decades building. That evening, as we sat on our new porch watching the sun set over Lake Coeur d'Alene, I found myself thinking about resilience. At 67 years old, I'd learned that human beings are capable of both unimaginable cruelty and remarkable healing. Nicholas and Erica had shown me the depths of greed-driven evil, but the veterans who'd honored Harold Wickham had shown me the heights of principled loyalty. "Do you think we'll ever forgive him?" I asked Robert as darkness claimed the water. He was quiet for a long time, considering the question that had haunted both of us since the night everything changed. "I think forgiveness is something we do for ourselves, not for the people who've wronged us," he finally said. "Maybe someday we'll be able to let go of the anger because carrying it hurts us more than it hurts Nicholas." Forgiveness felt impossible now, but so had survival 6 months ago. We'd learned that human beings were capable of adapting to circumstances that seemed unbearable, of finding new definitions of family when old ones proved toxic, of building new homes when familiar ones became dangerous. The insurance money that Nicholas and Erica had tried to steal would fund college scholarships for military families, a fitting memorial to Harold Wickham and a positive legacy emerging from the wreckage of our old life. We'd chosen to transform the symbol of our near destruction into a tool for helping others build better futures. As I write this story, sharing it with you across the internet that connects us all, I want you to remember something important. The people closest to you are capable of both incredible love and unthinkable betrayal. Trust, but verify. Love, but protect yourself. And never assume that family loyalty is automatically reciprocated just because it's deeply felt. We survived because we questioned what didn't make sense, because we trusted our instincts when comfortable assumptions became uncomfortable realities, and because we refused to let shock paralyze us when action was necessary. These lessons might save your life someday, just as they saved ours. If this story has resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so others can benefit from these hard-learned lessons. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let me know that our experience can help create a community of people who understand the importance of staying alert to danger, even when it comes from those we love most. Harold Wickham's sacrifice wasn't in vain if it helps even one family recognize the warning signs of betrayal before it's too late. Sometimes the dead can protect the living, if we're wise enough to listen to what their stories teach us about the eternal struggle between love and greed, loyalty and selfishness, family and money. Thank you for listening, and remember, trust carefully, love wisely, and never let anyone convince you that your life is worth less than their financial problems. Stay safe out there.